Hi, my name is Jerry from Jerry PH Photography. Welcome to Pocket Wizards ControlTL, mild to wild. Hi, welcome back to video number 4 of Pocket Wizards mild to wild. In this video we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. Right now, instead of going into one subject deep in depth, I've decided to come up with 10 topics, and we're going to call these 10 useful things that you should know about your Pocket Wizards. So let me go through this little list here, tell you what they are, and then we can dive right in. Number 1, how to mix and match your old Pocket Wizard units with your ControlTL units. Number 2, introduction to the Pocket Wizard utility. Number 3, how to change channels within the Pocket Wizard utility. Number 4, basic and full resets, how to and what they affect. Number 5, learn mode, how to change your channels without the Pocket Wizard utility. Number 6, 2 cameras, 1 ControlTL environment, how do we work this? Number 7, control flash power with off-camera flash, control flash power with off-camera MiniTT1 and AC3. I've got to learn how to read one day. Number 8, using ControlTL units with Sekonic meters. There's 3 scenarios that we're going to touch on in this section. Number 9, one of my favorite features, SpeedCycle, how to use it, what it does. Number 10, how to supercharge your camera's maximum sync speed, thanks to the Pocket Wizard ControlTLs. Let's jump right into it with the first one, starting now. One of the things that I used to really like about Pocket Wizards is their unspoken guarantee that no matter what, the newer versions of the Pocket Wizards will always be functional with the previous or older versions. And this has been true up till day one. Now, for a company that's been out for decades, that's really, really nice. And it's also something that's never been done by anyone else. What it means is, if you take a look at some of the newer triggers, even today, the most recent ones, very few of them have any, first of all, they don't have any history because they're all new. And second of all, even the ones that have come out with 2 or 3 or 4 versions of their triggers, none of them is compatible with each other. So it's very few new companies that are doing this, and they're starting to realize that this is a very important feature. If you're trying to garner in customers, you want them to stay with your company. Don't engineer in planned obsolescence by coming out with new versions that are incompatible with your older versions. And this has been something that Pocket Wizards has been aware of since day one. And it's nice. It's very, very nice. What that means is, no matter what they come out with new features, newer versions, they'll always be functional with your older versions. And what I'm going to do is, as an example, I have, for example, the Pocket Wizard Plus here, the Plus 2s, excuse me, and I have a receiver here. And I have this old legacy Sunpack 120J flash. And I know that if I set this onto a particular channel and I set this onto the same channel, no matter what, it'll be functional. I'll be able to set off this flash wirelessly. What's nice is, when it comes time to talk ControlTL, the day that I do that, it works great too. If this flex is sitting on top, sitting under a flash, and I have this one here, that's cool. But there's also that unspoken promise from Pocket Wizard that says, from this ControlTL unit, I should be able to trigger that one. And it does. And let me explain to you how before I prove that it does. The first thing is, every transmitter, meaning a Flex TT5 when it's sitting in the hot shoe of a camera, or a MiniTT1 that's sitting in the hot shoe of a camera, every transmitter that is ControlTL has the ability to transmit on both ControlTL channels and standard channels. Let's quantify that for a second. The ControlTL channels are different from the standard channels, and they're different in a couple of different ways. 1, because it's a different frequency. 2, it's because of the content or the data stream is different between the two. When it comes time to talk standard channels, they're meant to transmit only one command: fire now. And so when it does, off it goes. When it comes time to talk ControlTL, Don't forget, we have the ability to control groups. We have the ability to control power. We have the ability to include TTL. And we have the ability to send off metering shots. And all this stuff is integrated into the side of the ControlTL. So that when I come over here and I set that to automatic, it sets off the pre-flashes and everything else. And it works. So when it comes time to mix and match, because these two have the ability to send on both the standard and ControlTL channels, I should in theory be able to do both of these. And it's very simple. All I have to do is make sure that the standard channel in the MiniTT1 is set to whatever channels I'm using here. And the moment I do that, it becomes dreadfully easy. On a factory default configuration, let's say under the C1, it is set to use channel 1 for the ControlTL channels and channel 1 for the standard channels. So that when I do, let me just disable this flash here for a second. I'll set that to a different group. When I set this to the same channel that this one's using, off it goes. And when I turn this on and use this for those channels, they both go off. So it's a matter of, now I have the ability to have both of these shooting off. Now, it's true, this is going to be using a ControlTL channel. This is going to be using a standard channel. Yet, here I am using them both in concert. So, let me just cover that up just to show you. I'm not sure if it's really even visible because they're both going off at exactly the same time. But here I am using both of them. So if I come over here, I'll set this to channel 2, all of a sudden, only the bottom one is working. If I set this to channel 1, which is what this one is set to, they're both working. And that's how we use plus, for example, plus 2s or the legacy versions with ControlTL. Now the same rules can apply to a plus X, to a plus 3, to a multimax. As long as the channel that it is set to is what channel the MiniTT1 is set to transmit on in the standard channel line, it will always be able to trigger it. And that's one of the nice things that I love about the Pocket Wizards. On to the next. Okay, before we get into the quick overview of the Pocket Wizard utility, or the configuration utility, let's take a look at where to get it first. If I go to pocketwizard.com/support/downloads and then come right down here, we have the ability to download the utility here based on our platform. For me, for example, I would download the Windows version, save the file locally, execute it, and install it. Once it's installed, I can bring up the application, and in its default, it will look something like this. So from here, I can check for updates, update my firmware, do factory resets for units that are connected. Right now, these are grayed out because there's nothing connected. One thing that I will tell you a little bit about is when it comes time to check for updates, there's something I just want to talk about very quickly. If I go to the bottom left and click this little button here and click firmware updates, if you're one of those people who has a recent camera and is waiting for the most recent version of a firmware to come out, 9 times out of 10 they'll release a beta version before they release the full version. So if you want to get the latest version in beta format for your camera, you have to select yes and then click OK. Then when you click on the check for updates, if there's any updates, it will not show you just these here, but it'll show you these here. And these are the beta versions for the most recent cameras that are released. So you can then click on download all the files, click download, and then when you want to update whatever unit you connect to your system right now, you don't have to be connected to the internet. Otherwise, if you don't have these files locally, you won't be able to download them unless you have internet access. Okay, so let's get into it first of all. I'm going to plug in my MiniTT1 and take a look at this. So before we get any further here, I would like to invite you all to take a look at the advanced mode here and click. Pay attention to this line up here. As I click advanced mode, it gives us a whole extra bunch of stuff for us to look at very quickly. So I'm going to go into the settings, configuration C1 and C2. So remember this page? That's the update page. Notice that the update firmware and factory reset are now available. They're not grayed out. Settings page, C1 and C2. Remember the little buttons that you would have on the side there, off, C1, C2? Here's where you configure those individually. So if I go into things like the channel, as a transmitter, I can go to the ControlTL channels and lower them or raise them right here. Or make changes on the standard transmitting channels, lower or raise them there. Then I can go into the flash. These are options oriented for control of the flash in terms of how we want the flash to work in conjunction with our MiniTT1. Here we have our options for hypersync, which I'll be taking a look at a future date. Power tracking, again, something that we're not going to cover because I don't have the equipment to display this, but it's there. Okay, so I'll touch on it perhaps just in terms of the theory a little bit later on. The modeling lamps, again, something that we are going to use in a setup which uses studio strobes, which have compatible Pocket Wizard adapters. And then we have things associated with USB power sleep modes or remote TTL flash sleep modes. And then we have a couple of miscellaneous options that we'll be talking about again a little bit later. So I just want to make that note again. These two are independent of each other. If I come over here and change this to channel 3, in configuration 2, it will be whatever it is. Which brings me to the thing that I do want to talk about. Note the default channels for each configuration. By default, ControlTL transmit channel 1 and standard transmit channel 1 are in C1. When I go to C2, we're talking channel 2. One of the nicer things here is once we have made our changes, we have to apply the changes and then click OK, and the changes will be written to the ControlTL unit. Replicate, this button's kind of cool. If I happen to have more than one of the same kind of ControlTL unit, for example, I have 5 flexes and I need them to all be configured identically. I'll make all my configurations and then I will apply the change and I will unplug, replug the second one, hit replicate. It will copy the last changes. And then I can plug in the second one, replicate. Third one, replicate. What this does is it helps me avoid needing to fill in and make all the changes manually. And then once I have that, if I create a specific setup that's very special in terms of my options here, I can save that profile and give it a name. And later on, I can then load that profile. Now again, once it says, you want me to load a profile? Sure, just be aware that whatever you do is going to be lost there. And I click yes. And it gives me a list of profiles that I have available. Okay? So I can create a whole bunch of different settings and just load these profiles based on whatever I need in terms of functionality or which kind of studio flash or speed light I'm using. Lots of flexibility. I know we're going a little bit quick, but there's a lot to do in a short amount of time, and I don't really think I need to go into super great detail on this. Otherwise, we'd have like a 3-video course just on this app alone. We'll touch on this app based on the needs of the features that I touch on, and that'll be great. However, there's 2 kinds of help we can get. The first kind of help is if I click on this button here, the help, it'll pop up an HTML file that the configuration utility installs on your local hard drive that talks a little bit more in detail on each tab. So this is a great way for you to get to know this application a little bit better. Another thing to do is pop right here. This moves over this little section here and it gives us the ability to look at the context help window based on where we are within the program. And again, I encourage you to go through all of this, read this. This is all good reading, all stuff that you can use as you get into the more advanced features of the Pocket Wizard configuration utility. So this is basically all I wanted to do at this point. Let's move on to the next section. All right, let's have a little fun with this one here. You are now officially all high-end fashion photographers, and you're going to a big event where there's going to be a lot of other photographers. You know that a lot of these other people are going to be using Pocket Wizard items. So what you're going to do is you're going to try to avoid them using your flashes. So you're going to want to put these on channels that are different than what the norm are. As a general rule, most of them will use anywhere from the first 2 or 3 or 4. And the reason for that is relatively simple. If you're going to use something like a plus or a plus 2, those are limited to 4 channels. If you're going to use a plus X, you might be limited to 10 channels or 16 channels. And if you're going to use like a multi-max, you're going to be limited to the first 32 channels. So the chances are less that someone's using your lights or your channels than if you don't use the factory defaults. So when I'm talking about the Pocket Wizard Mini, it's only a transmitter. Therefore, you can only transmit on certain channels. But there's 2 parts of any equation. There's going to be, the transmit side and the receive side. So let me just remove the Mini and let's plug in a flex. The flex, as you see, has 2 sections, a transmit and a receive, which is a little bit different from what just the Mini has of itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to make a decision here and maybe write it down or put it on a piece of tape or tape it to the bottom of our units, something that says, hey, I'm changing the default channels and I'm going to use non-standard channels so that nobody else uses my channels when I'm in the middle of trying to work. Therefore, they can't use my flashes or use flashes or at the very least disrupt my flashes while I'm trying to get a shot. And the way that it works is this way. When we're talking ControlTL units, meaning the Mini or the Flex, I want to change the ControlTL channels. And I have to make a decision. For example, I want to use channel, let's say 7. And as far as the ControlTL is concerned, we can go up to 20. There you go. And same thing for the receive channels, right? We can go all the way up to 20. However, what I want to do is make sure that we're always going to be on the same channel. Now, in the case of the MiniTT1, I'm going to go into the ControlTL section and say, like I said, I want to use channel 7. Excuse me. Oh, that's 8. I'll set that for channel 7. Okay. And then on all of my Flex TT5s, I need them to go into and read the same channel. Because if they're on different channels, you're not going to be able to trigger them properly, right? So what we can do here is set them all to channel 7 and all is good. What happens if you're mixing and matching older versions of the Pocket Wizard with your newer versions of the Pocket Wizard? The nice thing that I mentioned before is any transmitter from Pocket Wizard that's a ControlTL unit has the ability to transmit simultaneously on ControlTL and standard channels. Anything that's going to be a receiver, which in this case is a Flex TT5, that is a ControlTL unit, can only receive either a ControlTL channel or a standard channel. You notice that this one's going to gray out as soon as I choose the other one. So what I want to do is I'm going to set my transmit channels for the ControlTL units to be the same. And I'm going to set my standard transmission channel other than channel 1, because that's the default that everyone uses, based on what kind of unit I have. For example, if I have a +2, I might set my standard transmit channel to 4. And then on my +2 units, I would set that slider over to channel 4. And that means that my ControlTL flashes and my flashes controlled by my standard Pocket Wizard units would both fire. So that's the way we would do that. Another thing that's good to do is to have different setups, C1 and C2, in case someone just happens to be using your setup, okay? So what I like to do is create 2 setups. In C1, I'll use non-standard settings, And in C2, I will make it a little bit different. And I might use channel 3 here. Well, excuse me, hold on. That's got to be 13 too, doesn't it? Right? So, and this one I might use channel 3. So right now, when it comes time for my, for example, my +2 units, I'd have one for channel 4 and one for channel 3. And when it comes for my ControlTL units, one would be on channel 7 and the other one would be on channel 13. And the good thing that's important to remember is that you have your receivers set to the same channel as your transmitters, even though they are two physically different units. So what that means is you're going to have to come into, when you install your, and then you just sort of, for example, let's write this out. I'm going to apply this and click yes. So you see the settings are being written. It does a little reset. Okay. So then I have to remember this. So it's going to be 7 and 4, 13 and 3. And this, since I'm right now, I'm working on my receiver, which is a Flex TT5, right? What I can do is I'm going to remove this, and then I'm going to come over here, install the MiniTT1, and make sure that oops, here we go. And then whatever the second one was, I just don't remember off the top of my head. 13 and 3. Whoops. Okay. So, and make sure that these are the same. So that your channels for your transmitter match the settings from your receivers. Okay. So, and then you have to save those two setups. Let me reload that Flex TT5 again. And that's the way that this works. Okay, always make sure to save your profile. And if you want to, you can always reload it at a later date. If you have multiple TT5s you want to flash so that their settings are identical, use the replicate function. It's always fun. And that's the way that we change channels using the Pocket Wizard utility. Resets. First off, what do? They return settings back to their factory originals. And there are two types of resets that we can do. There is the partial, and then there's the full. And there's two ways to do each one. The partial one, or the basic reset if you will, the only things that it returns back to normal are the channel settings for C1 and C2. In other words, your ControlTL and your standard channels for configuration 1 and configuration 2 are reset to factory settings. The second one, which is the full reset, changes not only the channels but all the other sets, all your flash, your hypersync, your any of the other possible settings that are available to you in the configuration utility. Those are set to the original factory defaults. When do we want to do this? Well, if you're something like me, I love to play a lot with these things. I love to play with the different configurations. I play with the different channels. I mix and match until I forget basically where I am. And to get me back to a basic setup that I know functions for me, I return everything to the factory defaults. And then I play with them again. So, the way to do a basic reset, I'll explain it to you, then I'll do it. You press and you hold the test learn button, and then you turn on the power, either to C1 or C2. I always set it to C2. You'll then see the light flash once. Then a few seconds later, it will flash twice. At that point, if you let go the test learn, you have done a basic reset. To do a full reset, you press and hold the test learn button with the units off. You flip it on. Don't let go of that test learn button. You're constantly holding it. It flashes 1 green. Then a few seconds later it flashes 2 greens. You wait approximately 4 seconds later and it flashes 4 greens. At that point, if you release it, it being the test learn button, you have done a full factory reset, at which point I turn off the unit before using it again. And that's how you do a full and basic reset of a ControlTL unit, which, by the way, is identically done with the MiniTT1. In my example, I was using a Flex TT5, but it's exactly the same thing with a MiniTT1. Let's go on to the next section. Learn mode. Learn mode is a way that I can take a ControlTL system and have it listen to and change its settings from another unit. In our demonstration, we're going to take a +2, and just as a demonstration, I have them set to channel 4. So if I come over here and hit the test button, I'm setting off the flash. Now, by default, in the stock or default configuration, I can't set it off because C1 is set to channel 1, C2 set for channel 2. I need to set C1 to channel 4 so that this works. So how do we do that? Let me just turn off this here so it doesn't disturb us while we're doing the demonstration. Basically, you take this unit here, it can be either the Mini or the Flex, and you turn it on. Make sure you're not holding the test learn button for the moment. Wait a couple of seconds, wait till it turns on. At this point, I'm going to press and hold the test button. I'm transmitting, and this is draining a lot of battery power out of it, so make sure that you're starting off with fresh sets of batteries, okay? And as soon as it changes to an amber flashing, I then press the test button on the +2, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and it's sort of listening, and as soon as this turns green, it says, ah, I've learned. Cool. So I'm going to turn this off, turn this on again, and just for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to show that this one is on channel 4 by setting off the flash. I'm now going to see if it's worked with the plus. Previously, pressing the test learn did not work. However, now it's working. And this is this is the learn mode for the Pocket Wizard ControlTLs. So whatever these can be set to, this can learn it, listen to it, and it sets it off. Now there's some limitations. If you don't have another unit like this, or if you don't have your trusty little laptop, you can't change the channels. So you need to do it one way or the other. But in a pinch, this is a great way to do it. Multiple cameras, one ControlTL environment. How do we work this? In this scenario, ideally, if I happen to have 2 cameras, for example, if I'm carrying both 2 cameras with different lenses at a wedding, I would keep everything as you see it, which means each one has their own AC3, each one has their own MiniTT1, and we have our camera. However, there are certain scenarios in which this kind of a setup is not quite always possible. One of these setups was when I was recently giving a kind of a seminar to a group of TTL users, ControlTL users, and what happened was I wanted to be the only person that had control over the light power. So my camera was the only one that's going to have an AC3 on top of it, so they can control the manual power settings of the lighting setup. However, if I take a look at everyone else's camera and told everyone to take off their AC3s, instantly this does not become a manual trigger. It becomes a single group ITTL solution. Those of you who saw video number 1 and number 2 will know this. So this is not what we want, because right now this one's sending TTL information to this flash, and this one might be sending manual information to this flash. I want this to be treated basically as a dumb trigger. However, what's preventing me from using, say, like a +2 and just slapping it in there and making this work? Well, remember, this guy can only listen to either ControlTL or to standard channels. It doesn't do both. So it's going to either work on one or the other. So the solution is I need to set this guy up so that all he does is send a straight ControlTL signal to the flash to fire off this trigger at whatever power settings are set over here. Now, right now, I have this basically set as the two setups here. So if I have a full setup and every one of these is in their own way functional, if I set this to, they're both at 1/64th power right now, I can tell you just by feel. If I come over here, pop off this one, and then pop off this one, it's going to be the same. However, I can come over here, set this to full power, okay, and then come over here, leave this one as is, pop off that, and then let's see if you can notice the stronger flash in this case here. I can tell right off the bat, and I hear the whiz, and I can still see it recycling here. So yeah, I'm sending off full power pops. So these are individual cameras. Now what I wanted to do is to take this off. The moment that I do that, this becomes a single group TTL solution. So while this one's still shooting at single flash at 1/64th power, which is what the last setting I set it at, this one is, and I'm wondering if you're going to be able to see the pre-flashes or not. I can see them with my eye. I don't know if they'll register on the film, but I have a TTL solution, which is not what I want. I want this one just to send the signal to say, hey, fire this flash at whatever power setting this one is set to. So to do that, we're going to have to change its configuration in the configuration utility. Let's take a look at how that's done. Okay, our goal is to try to have the MiniTT1 not be involved in changing flash power output irrespective of where it is. And right now, we're going to plug this in. Our scenario was that we had two D700 cameras, because this could be any one of a series of supported cameras. It doesn't have to be D700. It could be any Pocket Wizard supported camera. And what we need to do is we need to change this so that it doesn't have the ability to modify whatever power settings on the remote flash that the other camera has it set as. And what we do is we click on the flash here. We set this to optimize rear curtain sync manual shutter speeds, and we set this to no change, trigger only. Now in and of itself, all I needed to do was this setting right here. But in the seminar that I was teaching, we were all in manual mode, and one of the topics that came up that we were discussing was rear curtain sync. So I have to set this off right here. But for the demonstrations, it doesn't really need to be. Out of habit, this is what I do. I just set that off. Now that it's all set up, I click on Apply Changes. I click on, are you sure you want to write this configuration? I sure do. And we come down here and we see that it is writing things out. The reset has happened. We are now ready to put it back on camera and show you that it's now become a very basic trigger for the time being. Okay, we're back with the reconfigured MiniTT1. We're going to slap that right on top here. Make sure the camera is off. I'll turn this on, or actually just screw it in. Now, again, we're going to just follow the same turn on order, top down. When I come here and I set this to full power, I'll fire off 1/64th power. I'll set this off at 1/64th power. Then, no matter what this one is set to, it will set off at the exact same power level, and you can't change it. You'll notice this time there weren't any pre-flashes. How about if I set this to full? Just to test that out, I'm going to come off here and go pow. That's a full power flash. I'm going to wait for it to recycle. It's back. Now if I come over here, remember, pow, that's another full power flash. And now we're back to recycle. No matter what I set it to here, I'll go back down to 1/64th. Bang. I can now come over here, and this changes nothing. It's going to always set off the flash, and it will always be at the same power level that I've always set it at. So that's one of the nice things about it, and that's the nice thing about having all that control. So you've noticed that I've always made a change here, and then I've popped off a flash, and then come over here, and the rest of the time then it could set off at the same power level. What happens if I just do this? Well, now it's going to take a few extra seconds for this to tell that to go up, and sometimes it can miss that sort of signal if you're going a little bit too fast. So what I can do is I can sort of speed it up a little bit by say, hey, hold on, I'll focus here. Now it's going to send it, or I can press the test learn button. That will send it also. The most reliable way that I've found to do it is to just pop off a frame on the camera. Okay? It's the equivalent of just pressing the test learn button here on top. And that means that this new power setting that I've set here is what it's going to be. So again, if I've set this to, let's say 1/64th, I can come over here, and I have not hit the power the flasher, but I have hit the focus button. That's a low power flash. If I come over here, no waiting, that's a low power flash because it didn't do anything. I didn't give it time to say, hold on, send that power signal. So I can come over here, and then now if I hit it, it should be a full power flash. There it is. Another way would be if I come over here and do a pop, set that off, and now that's going to be a full power flash. Every time I press it here, it's going to be a full power flash too. Now I'm just pay attention to recycle time, and pop. Now I'm ready for another one. So it gives you an idea. This now becomes basically a ControlTL dumb trigger. All right, and that means that it can work with all my setup. Whatever I do here, groups 1, groups 2, groups 3, whatever changes I make, this will just activate those changes. And not just in power level settings, but in group level settings. And also, by the way, I can mix and match ITTL and manual here, and this one will set off those lights in exactly the same way. The problem with the ITTL is there's going to be a problem with reliability, because this one is not able to meter TTL information. It just says fire. So it's going to fire with what? With the last power information that this guy fired at. Now, if two photographers are standing beside each other, not a problem. But if you're at two different sides of the room or two different distances, or something changes, that TTL information becomes unreliable. So in this scenario, highly recommended, stick to manual. Okay, you set your 3 groups here, set them all to manual power, set up the way you want it. This one's going to just say fire those lights at those settings consistently. And that's how this section here works. We've now shown you how to work multiple cameras in a single ControlTL environment. On to the next. Okay, in the last video we had this guy set to trigger only, and this one was set to become a normal standard trigger, and we control the power output from this one so that whatever we set this to and then just set this camera off, the flash would just fire off at those power levels. So how do we do it that I can do this and have complete control off camera? Well, in the case of if I have just one camera, we do exactly what we had before, except we just do one thing. Pop, we pull this off, all right? And this one's going to control. However, if I have 2 or more cameras and I want them to have the same settings, I want them to have the same power settings, and I want them to be controlled, the remote ControlTL unit from one location, I just do the same thing like I did last time. I take off the AC3 from here, I set this one to trigger only, so I have basically 2 dumb triggers. I can then take this AC3 and slap this on top of either another MiniTT1 or a Flex TT5. And then what happens is when I turn this on, I can then set the power settings from the AC3 here, right? So if I have to set them to manual, I set my 3 groups, my power, and here's the difference though. For the remote flash to receive the power settings, I have to pop off a test flash, okay? So I'm gonna have to press the test button every time I make a change here so that the flash receives the new settings. And that's the only difference between how to do it with one camera in the master, having the master control over the flash, and having 2 cameras and being able to walk around with my control off camera totally in my hand. And again, this can be either a Flex or a Mini. And again, just to make sure that this is clear, every time I make a change on the AC3 settings, I pop off a test flash, send the new settings, and these guys are going to fire them off at the last settings that I set it to here. That's how we do this. On to the next. ControlTL and Sekonic light meters. There's 4 different ways that we can work with most Sekonic meters, or 4 points that we should take into consideration. And a lot depends on the kind of meter that you have, the model, and the kind of transmitter that you have inside them. What I like to use is the older Sekonic L358. And what happens was, by default, these come with absolutely no kind of transmitter in them. And what you have to do is then you have to set them up in such a way that when you set off the flash by camera, that they'll be able to read the function. So the first way to do that is, if I want to do this using, like, for example, the slave mode, I would set this to the small lightning bolt setting in here. I would press the button on the side here, and I have up to 10 seconds to get a flash for this to read. So this is the first way. Press, this sets to 0, and I can press the test learn. I then get my reading. In this case it was f2.5. The second way is if you happen to have the basic or old style transmitter built into these. Now remember, ControlTL units can listen only on one type of channel and one channel number. They can listen to ControlTL or they can listen to standard channels. If you have the older kind of meter here with the older kind of transmitter, it can only transmit on the standard channels, which means that if you want to have the ability to press this button and trigger those flashes, you have to have this one listening on a standard channel. It works. So what's the price to pay? You lose all ControlTL functionality. So that means that all your transmitters, your ControlTL transmitters, are going to have to be set to a standard channel, which means they cannot control the power outputs, which means you're back in the old days, you're triggering just the flash to fire, and no control. So for example, no remote power control. The third option is we can use an R32 CTL transmitter. These are a little bit different, and it just sort of just pops right in here. And what it does, it has the ability to transmit on both ControlTL and standard channels. Excuse me. So what happens then is, if I take this and turn it on and take the mode and set it so that it can transmit on the proper channel, so I can come here, check the mode, I can then change the channel to whatever channel matches this ControlTL unit. I then set it into the transmit mode, and I don't have to press here anymore. I press the button here and it sets off my flash, giving me the reading. So that's the second last way. The last way is probably the most interesting way in terms of if you're really into the ControlTL setup, and that involves purchasing a different meter. The Sekonic L758 meter looks something akin to an iPhone with a little light bulb attachment here on top. or the light capturing device, if you will. And what it does, it has an LCD output. Not only can you trigger them like this, you can also set the power settings from the meter itself. So it kind of has a remote, not just a remote transmitter in it, but a remote AC3 built into it as well. So, and that's kind of very, very cool in terms of the techno geeks. If you're really into that, I would kind of enjoy one. But I've never found the real need to go into that because I'm not a studio shooter per se. 99% of the times that I'm shooting, it's going to be outside a studio, and it's going to be in a location where I don't have time to do a lot of ratio setting and metering and things like that in general. I'm in fast-moving dynamic environments, so doing that is not something that I do very often. And when I do it, this does everything pretty much that I need to. It can transmit on the standard channels, so it'll trigger my +2s, and it will trigger my, as you can tell, my ControlTL units, and it gets me my reading. And then how do I control the power level outputs from here? If you saw the last two videos, you know exactly what I do. I come over here, I change the settings on the AC3 on top of my camera, pop off a flash, then do my metering, and it gives me my light value. So that's how we're going to use Sekonic meters with the ControlTL environment. On to the next. SpeedCycle. What is it? This is a really cool feature that lets me trigger my flashes in a manner that's a little bit different from the standard way. When I have 3 different speed lights in 3 different groups, Group A, Group B, and Group C, and if I press and I have them all activated and turned on the AC3 on top of my MiniTT1, which is on top of my camera, and I hit the shutter button, all 3 of them pop off at once. Okay? So that's the standard way it would work. SpeedCycle lets me, with a single press, first pop off Group A, second press Group B, third press Group C. Why would I want to do that? Well, if I happen to have a situation where I'm, say for example, shooting outside on a little bit brighter day, for example a skateboard park, and I have this guy zooming along and he's moving here, and for me to properly light him I have to hit each flash at full power. By the time the guy moves from here, I'll have hit once, but then I have to wait 3 seconds before I can hit the other ones, right? For the recycle time. What happens if I can go full power pop, full power pop, full power pop, one time after another? That's exactly what SpeedCycle does. It lets me not worry about the recycle time because I'm going to be doing whatever power setting I want from here, but it alternates them. Also, what it does is if I happen to have a moving object, it lets me get a proper exposure at 3 different locations without changing anything. And the only thing I have to do is time in the proper way in terms of if the object is moving from here to here, Group A, Group B, Group C. Or if he's going from here to here, Group A, Group B, Group C. Okay? So that's the kind of thing that what I can like to do. So if I'm, for example, shooting bike races, I'll have my speed lights on the branches of 3 different trees, lighting 3 different areas of the street, and as they move along I can go pop, 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 wait my 3 seconds, next guy comes along, pop, 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 and I can be using them at full power, right? Now I'm not forced to use them at full power. I can use them at any power level setting that I want, but these are just examples of how I would use SpeedCycler. It also helps me if I happen to have, for example, somebody that I want to do a jumping shot and I'm forced to use full power and I don't want to be concerned about the recycle times. I can again put the 3 into a single umbrella. I can pop off 3 of them before I need to wait. Now, somebody's going to probably turn around and say, well, why don't you just put 2 or 3 or 4 speed lights into one, and that way you don't have to wait for them. True. That covers the recycle time issue. It doesn't cover the 3 different locations issue, right? So remember, I can have this speed light on one part of the street, this one 10 feet down, this one 20 feet down away from this one. And I can have them set at different power levels. I can have them set all at TTL if I want to. But the point is, I can go, as this person's moving through my frame of vision, or through my field of vision, I can pop off 3 frames without needing to worry about lighting. Now, traditionally what would happen is, I could set like 2 or 3 lights into the same group and have them all popping off, right? That sort of cuts down on your battery life. So if I'm shooting a lot of bikers, and there's a whole group of bikers or runners or whatever is moving along, car races, I can save a lot of battery power by doing it this way too. So I know that they're going to be moving this way. I don't need to fire all 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 of my flashes all the time with every shot. It would work, but I'd be wasting a lot of battery power, a lot of time, what have you. SpeedCycler lets me do the 3 groups, and I can do them one at a time. But before we do that, we have to come over here and we have to set up our transmitter. And this is the key of how it works. Let me show you how that's done. SpeedCycle. Here's how we set it up on the side of the Pocket Wizard. The first thing we're going to need to do is to hook up our unit that's going to be sitting on top of the camera. And in this case, it's going to be a MiniTT1 with an AC3 on top of it. And that's important. We need to have a controller for SpeedCycle to work. Now this controller can be any of the other controllers, but again, as many know, by the time you've finished looking at this film, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the AC3. So for us to set up SpeedCycle, it's very simple. This has to be done on the unit that will be sitting on top of your camera. And we simply go into the miscellaneous tab, click on SpeedCycler, and apply those changes. Quick little reboot, and that's all you need to do to have this unit ready for the demonstration. Okay, I have the freshly reprogrammed MiniTT1. Let's slap that in here and try this out. Again, proper turn on order. Now, if this works the way it's supposed to work, we're supposed to get a 1, 2, 3. Let's try that out. And it seems to be working. I don't know if you can tell. Let me see if I can just sort of angle off the flashes and see if that will help a little bit. That's at the flash. Let me take a look at the front and see if that's doing it. And indeed it is. Success. And that's SpeedCycler. Yay. On to the next. Supercharging your maximum sync speed. Before we get into that, I just want to briefly touch on sync speed, what it is. Sync speed is the maximum shutter speed, or the highest shutter speed that your camera can use before one of 2 things happens. 1, if you have a TTL compatible flash, it will fall into something called high speed sync. Or you will start to see banding on your pictures. That means a portion of your picture will have a black line through it, either the bottom or the top, depending on the manufacturer of the camera and the type of shutter that you have. So that's one of the 2 things that we can do. So why do we not want to have a higher sync speed? Well, it's great to have a higher sync speed because that means every little bit more that I can go higher, that means that I can control my ambient just a little bit more. So if I happen to have a shot on a very bright day and I want to use either a little bit darker background, I can do it without sacrificing flash power. Now here's the kicker. That's the key word here. We don't want to sacrifice flash power. I mentioned the 2 ways that this can happen. One, we'll get into high-speed sync. High-speed sync is a way of the flash to pulse many times over so that it can fill the complete frame. The problem is, in very bright conditions where you need a lot of power, because you're using multiple flashes, there's no flash that can put out full power many times over that time period. What we can do is we can give it one burst, and then we have to wait those 3 seconds before the capacitors charge up again, or the unit recharges. So for it to be able to give us multiple flashes, it has to cut the power down a lot. That amount can be anything from 2 stops to almost 3.5 stops. That's a lot of power lost. So that line for most Nikon cameras is around 1/250th of a second. And I stay out of hypersync if I'm at I stay out of high speed sync at 1/250th or less. So I'm maximizing the power of the flash. The entire flash power is in the frame, and it fills the entire frame. One of the nice things that the Pocket Wizard can do is it lets me get that same amount of power without going into high speed sync, without having that loss of 2 to 3.5 stops of flash power, by just raising the shutter speed up a little bit. And it does this by adjusting the timing of the flash to the shutter event, and does it very effectively. They've called this technology hypersync, and it's really, really cool. But what it does do is it enables me to get my base maximum sync speed a little bit higher. So on my cameras, all of my cameras, it's up to 1/250th. There are certain cameras on the market that will go down to 1/200th. Some might even force you to go down to 1/160th. And if you're an old-time film user, you're stuck at a 60th of a second. That's it. But what would happen if I could go up to 1/320th, 1/400th? How about 1/500th of a second? That gives me 1/3, 2/3, 3/3 of a stop, a whole stop, more control over the background. And often that 1/3 of a stop makes the difference between getting a good picture and getting a great picture. So in my case, I appreciate that. If I can use a higher sync speed to darken my ambient without needing to affect my flash power, and that's the big kicker here. Yes, everyone says I can come up to you and maybe put an ND filter on the front of my camera, and it will knock down 1 stop or 2 stops of ambient. Yeah, it will do that, but you're also cutting down 1 stop or 2 stops of your flash power. What we're doing here is I'm increasing the shutter speed without losing light on my flashed subject, or without losing light on my subject that is lit by the flash. And that's kind of cool. Now there's certain limitations that we have to do. The physics of it are that eventually there's going to be some kind of a loss or some kind of a compromise somewhere along the line. There is no free lunch, as they say. So when it comes time to talk about a higher sync speed, yes, I'll be able to come and raise the sync speed, but eventually I'm going to hit a point where one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to fall into HSS mode, high speed sync mode, and which means I'm going to lose a lot of power, boom, or I'm going to start to get banding. I'm going to have portions of my picture cut. Now here's the nice part. Yes, I can get a little bit more shutter speed out of it. Depending on the camera, you can go up to 1/500th of a second. These are certain DX cameras that you can probably do this on. On an FX camera, it's really dependent on the type of camera. On my D4 or my D700s, I've been able to go up to 1/400th of a second. Now, to go from 1/250th to 1/400th, that's a good jump. That's a healthy jump, and it's free. I can go a little bit higher, but I'm going to start to sacrifice things here. Even at 1/400th, there's going to be a little bit of banding at the bottom. So if I'm going to crop a little bit wider, when I do the post-processing and I crop off that little dark area, it's going to be fun. It's not even going to show that I've been using, but my picture will have the added benefit of having a much higher sync speed, and that's kind of cool. So let's actually go and take a look at how this looks in real life on a computer with the camera under both circumstances. I want to show you examples of what the light looks like using normal sync speed going into high speed sync, and then normal sync speed going into hypersync. Okay, and we'll get into it right after this little demonstration of actually seeing the results. Okay, so here we are back at the Pocket Wizard configuration utility. For us to be able to find out how high we can go with our camera and our flash combination in terms of increasing our maximum sync speed, we need to go into the Hypersync HSS tab. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here and just say, let's look at this. I can go over here and choose Hypersync only, which is going to totally disable my HSS, but for this purpose of our experimentation, what I want to do is I'm going to come down here and drop down and choose 1/1250th of a second, meaning I'm going to be taking advantage of Hypersync at all speeds under 1250th. This is a lot higher than what I usually wanted. Because I've done this test before, I know how far my camera goes before it starts giving me results that are not acceptable to me. However, for you guys who've never done this before and might not know, you might want to select a lot higher shutter speed so that I can go up there and play at these higher levels and see the results and make your choices. You might find out that you can't get above 1/320th. So what you're going to do is you'll set it to 1/400th. If you can get to 1/400th, I want my my HSS to start at 1/500th. For the purposes of this test, let's go down as far as we can go, which is 1/1250th of a second for this test, and let's apply those changes. I'm applying those changes to C1. So let's click yes, write those settings. Let's go see what we can do now. Okay, let me tell you what I've done before I show you the results here. What I did was I set up my camera to shoot into a white door. I then set the power of my flash to 1/8 power. I specifically chose a low power so that it would have a very fast duration. And because it would have a fast duration, the examples in Hypersync later on are going to show degradation of the picture much faster than it would at higher power level settings. However, for the sake of this example, I set my camera up at, I believe it was ISO 200, f8, and all I did was play with the shutter speed. And the flash power remains consistent throughout all these photos. So this black photo that we're looking at right now denotes that I'm at the start of my series. This is before I went into Hypersync examples. This is straight HSS, high speed sync. This is what anyone with this camera would get using any kind of standard TTL flash on camera or off camera with a TTL trigger. If I take a look at the base photo, if you will, we're at ISO 200, 70mm f8 at 1/125th. We get to see that it's pretty much all blown out. We're very close to being completely blown out. If I move over to the next photo, you can see that I've gone to 1/60th. And again, it's very similar. We go over to 1/200th. Again, looks very, very similar. How about 2/50th? On my camera, this is the maximum sync speed. And again, it looks very similar. The moment I jump into HSS, whoa, huge difference. We're talking approximately 2.5 stops here, difference. A little bit more than 2.5 stops, actually. And that's a big drop in power. So as we move on, this is 1/400th, 1/500th, 1/640th, 1/800th, and 1/1000th. So, yeah, I mean, this is standard stuff, right? The big surprise comes when we go into hypersync settings. When I have switched over to C1, which is on my Mini's configuration, where I set it up so that high-speed sync will not start until 1/1250th of a second, up to 1/1000th of a second shutter speeds, I'm going to be in hypersync. Let's take a look at the results. If I come over here, that's the start. Now, the 1/125th of a second, we're looking at pretty much the same thing. Same thing for the 1/60th, same thing for the 1/20th, same thing for the 1/250th. Whoa! There's a big difference between this 1/320th and the 1/320th from when I was using the other version. Let me just compare these two for you. I'm going to take this one and this one. Oops. Okay. As soon as I figure this out. So we have that one, that one, and this one I want to be, which one? Is it this one? That's the 1/320th. Okay, 1/320th over here. And for this one, this is going to be the 1/320th of that side. So, yeah, you can see that there's major differences. And as you can tell, to date, we're not getting any banding. So right off the bat, I've gone from 1/250th to 1/320th, but at amazing power differences. That's a huge difference. That's a huge advantage. And this goes on the more that we move on. So I'm at 1/320th. Let's go take a look at 1/400th. Okay, I'm going to flip back and forth between these two, and I want you to pay attention up here and down here in the corners. That's a very small amount. We're looking at maybe 10% of the entire frame that would need to be cropped. If you crop your pictures a little bit bigger, I can move my camera up to 1/400th and use this successfully. If my picture is everywhere in here, and then I can crop this down, for example, do something as simple as, let's just constrain the I mean, you don't even have to go that much. We can just go up to there, and then maybe up to there. And then my picture looks really, really good. Let me undo that, okay? So, go back there, make sure that's all there. Yeah, let's go back to the full size here so that I can see the differences. Now, we're at 1/400th, right? Remember, here's 1/400th, here's the settings. Let's move up a little bit more shutter speed. Whoa, 1/500th, huge difference. Okay, let's go to 1/640th. Uh-oh. But you notice inside, that light is not dimming, but we're losing a lot in the center. Okay, let's go down to 1/800th. Oh heck, let's go to 1/1000th. Wow, this makes it pretty much a useless picture, right? But don't forget, I am shooting at 1/8th power. Okay, 1/8th or 1/16th power. So I'm shooting at a very low power level. And flash at this power level has a very short duration. If I was to increase the power, in theory, this is going to open up. Let's take a look. I'm going to now show you a frame where I've increased my flash power to full. Look at that. Okay. What would happen if I went to 1/1000th and then maybe half power? It would look very similar to my 1/400th. at 1/8 power. So not only can we play a lot with this, but I'm just giving you the basics, the concept of hypersync. And I don't want to go too much deeper into here because in the next video we're going to talk in detail about hypersync, and I'll show you how it works with not only speed lights but with monolights. And I just want to show you the advantages. So for me, what I want you to come home with from this video is that if I'm using straight timing and I fall into the HSS world at everything that's 1/250th and anything that's faster than that, we lose a lot of power. However, I can walk up to 1/250th, 1/320th, 1/320th without a concern. 1/400th, if I want to do some minor cropping, 1/400th for me would be excellent. If I wanted to get into this part here, well, yeah, I can go up to 1/500th. And I could probably make 1/500th look really good. The only thing I got to do is increase my flash power to maybe 1/4 or 1/2. And then this cleans up pretty much completely. But, so this is how you would supercharge your sync speeds. And by default, here's the nice thing about it. 1/320th, which is this one right here. I can go up to 1/320th on pretty much any light source, on pretty much any power setting, and it will look as good as this does right here. If I can push it up to 1/400th, I can make pretty much any light source at almost any power look as good as this. Meaning, with some minor cropping, I can have an incredibly well lit picture without any loss of power. If I take a look at the 1/400th here versus the 1/400th on the other side, which would be this one, that's a heck of a power difference, right? That's a big difference between the two. So 1/320, oh, excuse me, that's 1/320th here. Let me come up here. All right. So 1/320th here to 1/400th over there. So this is the same amount of light, the same amount of settings, the shutter speeds, right? On the same settings. We have f8, 1/320th over here. Actually, here, you can just come over here and do that one. So this is the 1/400th. And this is the, I believe that's that one. That's it, 1/400th. There we go. Now I got it straight. Oops, do I have it right? No, this is the 1/320th. Pop. 1/400, okay. 1/400, 1/400. Finally! Son of a gun. I gotta learn how to use this one day. All right, so this is in high speed sync. This is in hypersync. So you can tell that with some minor cropping, I can still get a lot more light here than I can from this one. This is where I'm going to end this video here at this section. Let's go to the conclusion of this video. Wow, we have covered a ton of material in this video. I certainly did not expect it to be this long. If you stuck through it all the way to the end, thank you very much. I so much appreciate it, and I can't even tell you how much I enjoyed making this for you. We're not through yet though. There's still one more thing that I've got to do, and that's to expand on hypersync a little bit more detail. In the next video, what I would like to talk about is how to take advantage of this in real life scenarios. And we're also going to discuss how we can talk about using not only approved Nikon flashes, but maybe third-party flashes and studio heads. See how HyperSync works with these technologies. So again, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.